Traveler, today is like any other day. We are bound by the circumstances we find ourselves in. One of the things that makes our journey unique is that no matter how many times you repeat a practice, you will always be in the state of change in a one-of-a-kind moment built off of the limitless causes and conditions that make up that moment. Now, traveler, I believe the only control you have in life is the control you have over your response, your individual expression, and agency in this world. While on a cosmic time scale, our actions amount to nothing more than dust. To us, these responses and actions are how we make our impact on the human story. Those impacts are what write the chapters of the human history, not one great individual. Regardless of what any of the great cults in history says, it's you and your impact, your actions, that impact the world itself, and it dictates how the story goes. So, traveler, on the hard days, and when the horrors of life start creeping into the corners of the plot, you matter. Your response matters. And while there might be no right decision when facing a seven-headed beast, like any other day, you can respond in a way that would change the story. Now, in order to start dealing with this stuff and to start kind of unpacking, first and foremost, why I haven't been on mic or haven't recorded since last year, I'm lucky enough to be joined by the one, the only, the illustrious
Jordan Shepard.
Jordan Shepard. Jordan, how are you doing today?
Doing okay, especially in this climate. The weather's getting a little bit better. It's a little bit brighter outlook, but otherwise it is still a challenging time in trying to adjust with the current environment and the climate, both actually and politically.
Yeah, no, I mean, quite literally, we are going from, I think yesterday we had our lows in the low 40s, and now today we're going to be in the upper 70s. So quite literally, from a climatological perspective, it's a lot.
Correct. It's a weird heat wave that's hitting us out of the blue.
I think I saw in Phoenix, Arizona, it's supposed to be 99.
Oh my gosh.
With it's March, and it's that's insane.
That is the same. Down in the south, it's getting into 100-degree weather, and it's, not even the summertime yet. And conditions there are only going to get worse once June and July hit. And
when it actually starts getting muggy.
Correct.
I think kind of that, kind of this heat wave we're going for is kind of a real good way to kind of talk about our experiences and kind of what's going on right now. So we're not here to sugarcoat anything. I think we're here to openly talk about that we believe that our country is currently going underneath some kind of fascist takeover. And that in the times where the days are hard and things are hot and the history pendulum is swinging from left to right real quick, I think it's important for us to take a moment to actually talk and express how we're dealing with all this shit. Not on a giant macro level of talking about being one of the great Democratic leaders or, part of the cult of personality in the administration who can change things by just making a tweet, but just as two individuals, two humans in this experience who are like, shit, how do I make an impact? How do I deal with this stuff? And hopefully not repeat the lessons that we've learned in history, right?
Correct. And that's also kind of a blessing and a curse with my situation. Originally from the Northwest and then moved down to the South for about 10 years. Kind of the interesting condition with living in the South is seeing a microcosm of what's happening on a larger scale and kind of getting to organize and prepare for it ahead of time in a capacity. So in the South, primarily hit by the effects of climate change and also by far-right national political rhetoric, we got to see the immediate effects that include a ripping out of government institutions, worsening of healthcare in the area, of education, making it more difficult for people to be politically active, and a clampdown on more progressive social values. Else parts in the country, there was still some concern and alarm, but it wasn't to the same degree as in the South. People in the South were dealing immediately with these crises, both politically and also environmentally. Temperatures getting a lot more warmer, summer's getting a lot longer, droughts occurring more frequently. And coming up back to the Northwest and returning to my home place, kind of reinforced how quickly everything is spreading. even though for more so, the Pacific Northwest is more kind of isolated from the rest of the country and more insulated from some of the bigger issues, both politically and environmentally.
Especially west of the Cascades.
That is correct. Yeah, it's a lot more stable, more control. There's still some of the consequences and some of the issues that are starting to creep into this area, both politically and environmentally. We're seeing far-right nationalism take place on a national scale. We're seeing it impact our local communities and how we navigate across borders with communities across the world and our basically long-term survival there. So even though we have kind of local state protections and we have this community that we can rely on, we're starting to see the problems in the interior of the country start to spread out and take over more and more places. And so I think being in the South for so long and seeing it happen on a local scale helps process what was going on, because it made it easier to predict what was going to happen or what to expect and prepare for that, as opposed to trying to rationalize everything in real time or trying to process in real time. And I think that's what a lot of folks are having trouble with, is that this is very urgent, very new for a lot of folks. And it's frustrating to try to react to this when there's so much stuff happening. Same with the environment. That one is acting a little bit slower in some capacity compared to political developments, but still we're seeing hotter summers. We're seeing longer wildfire seasons. We're seeing less rain, less snow cover in the mountains, and gradually over time that these conditions are only going to get worse until 5, 10, 15 years, the conditions here in the Pacific Northwest start to match what's happening in the South. And this is a good reason why being aware of what's happening across the globe is critical for understanding how to prepare your community in times of crises.
No, I think that there's a lot of different things that you just touched on, right? I think that one of the things I really want to respond to, with what you just said, right, that is like being able to have that exposure of living in a community where you had this kind of ingrained culture where far-right nationalism was growing, right, prior to this kind of taking over on a national scale, right? I think kind of in our entire lifetime have had these running tropes, right, of hearing about how the courts are being packed, right? How they're going for these different abortion bans and things like that. And I think one of the first kind of like big society wake-up calls, right, was the reversal versus Roe v. Wade, and realizing like, oh, wait, the status quo that we grew up with can be changed, can be altered, and essentially gone back to pre-civil rights era belief systems and like kind of functioning, right? One of the things in my story, right, is I actually did go through a period where I did get red pilled and black pilled, right? When I was a kid and on meth and everything like that, I got really into Alex Jones and the entire thing and all that different stuff. Now I didn't align with any of the Christian national stuff, obviously, but I was like so willing to believe that there was some deep state in Bohemian Grove planning out, project. I think it was Agenda 2021 back then or something like that. It was not even it's always a new document, right? And so I think that like I've been able to have like this weird both one of the responses that I've been kind of dealing with and like accepting of like, where is actually reality? What do we do now? How do we move forward? Is coming off of like, okay, well, I'm for the past decade or so, I've been pretty in tune with the right wing movement in this country, right? And I've been able to kind of process that and see where a lot of these and understand how we got to the MAGA cult with, especially through QAnon and stuff like that, right? I was really in touch with QAnon. So like I have like this very understanding kind of okay, this is the reality we're in now. It's not the first time a cult has taken over a government in the past. I mean, if you want to go back to the entire nationalism, right, thing of it all, Christianity itself is formed on a response to a state power and everything like that, right?
Correct.
And so humans aren't new to dealing with changes of the status quo or on those hot, hard days when things start changing. on top of that, the climate's just going to change, and it's figuring out how to adapt that, right? We aren't individuals at this point who are able to make policy like that on a national level. That's not either of our job here, Jordan.
Correct. I think for a lot of folks is, we're dealing with our daily lives where we're thinking about, what's happening this weekend, what's happening next year, or kind of the immediate future. And we don't really have an opportunity to look long term or to look across all of humanity and realize what small portion our lives and our moments are compared to everything that's going on. And when something occurs that disrupts your life, your normal life, trying to take care of family, trying to pay rent, get enough groceries to get by or just get to work, people try to start looking for explanations of why their life is getting disrupted for whatever reason. And it's real easy to say, my daily life is the standard normal. This is what it should be, and this outside force is disrupting it, and that is impeding on my life. And for that reason, it seems like a lot of people jump to the right because it is an easy explanation. It's an outside agitator that's causing this issue. It's not bad practices, or it's not a mismanagement of the system or the system itself. It's somebody else causing this problem. And so I think for a lot of people who don't really understand kind of how their life fits into the larger segment of humanity, or kind of understand like the different actors and actions happening, both today and 5 years ago, and what may be happening in the future, it's easy to say, this one specific thing is causing the problem. If we get rid of this thing, then my life will be back to normal. And I think that's the hardest part for a lot of people, is trying to deconstruct that, trying to relearn and say, here's what everything is on the larger scale. How does my life fit into that? How does my community fit into that? And how can we adapt ourselves to create a better condition for everybody, not just myself, but for every single person? And
I think you just really focused on something, I think, in kind of like that first kind of response I want to talk about actually here, right, is like, how do you actually, is first come to, I think the first thing that any individual person, I'm not talking about the leader of the FBI here, or I'm not talking about if you're a congressperson. If you're anyone who's in those positions, you guys better be taking much more direct action to fucking stop dealing with this shit. But for the average, Joe Jane, right, the average citizen, you random citizen, right, I think the first thing you should is stop. Respond in order to, instead of react, right? Figure out where you are. What is exactly what you talked about? Where are you at with your community? Where are these connections and everything like that? Not to use the infamous of touch grass, but like with how fast the news cycle with media and everything is, the doom scrolling that everyone goes through in these societies now and everything like that. This just barrage of not great information. It's intentionally designed to cause emotional reactions.
Correct.
Taking the moment to stop. And actually just be like, who are my connections in life? What is my community? What are, the things that I think those are some of those first steps, right, in taking the ability to deconstruct and actually figure out what are the emotions on this? What are your individual pathways for us, right? I think your first action is just stopping for a moment, getting yourself out of that doom scroll behavior, getting yourself out of the online arguments, right? Getting yourself out of listening to, like in my case, 17 hours nonstop of just political, and just anarchist thought, and everything like that, right? To try and understand everything, because like that's doing just as much harm too, right?
Yeah, it seems like whenever something big happens, there is this individual urge to be hyper attentive or try to do something. And I think a lot of people get discouraged when they're not able to fix that problem in an immediate sense, or the problem is too big for one person to tackle. And I think kind of going off of that point, one of the most simple things that you can do is basically just look to somebody on your left or right and say, hey, are you seeing this too?
Talk about it.
Talk about it. Is this impacting you the same way? I'm not crazy. This is, a serious thing. Should we be paying attention to it? And that right there helps with getting connected with other people and verifying that, no, it's not just some weird random thing. It's something that's affecting a lot of people. And when you start to have that discussion with your neighbors, with your friends, people close to you, and expand out to your community, you're more likely to find people who are struggling through similar or the same thing and able to kind of pull together different resources, different ideas, and be able to tackle the problem in a more holistic way that includes everybody in the discussion, offers more depth of thinking and insight, and an easier way to tackle the problem, or at least kind of weather out the problem too, because there are some things that we can't change for better or worse. But
we can't change that we're on the earth right now.
Correct. We can't change we're on the earth right now, but we can weather the storm, or we can make the conditions more tolerable for people, or for people seeking refuge from those, those dangerous areas too.
Loved a lot of what you just said there, Jordan. Loved a lot of what you just said. But I think to just take it that little step further, right? Just being able, so again, when you're typically dealing in history, right, with groups that rely on fear and coercion as instruments of control. Mm-hmm. What we're trying to see, right, in the kidnapping of fucking students, mm-hmm. All these fear tactics, the rushing the box, I believe is what Steve Bannon says, or flooding the zone or whatever they call it, right? Mm-hmm. It's intentionally designed to get you scared, because when people are scared, they don't act. And it's that fear that is how you can have your rights, your agency, and all those different things just trampled over by these systems, right? Admitting your fear is real, and talking about it with someone gives you the ability to identify it, mm-hmm. and deal with it. It's mm-hmm. not admitting that you're powerless over this thing. It's admitting that you're feeling an emotion. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that part of the whole deconstruction of how do you actually connect and deal with these communities, and actually figure out, like, how are we weathering the storm, or are there tangible things we can do, right? Mm-hmm. First and foremost, understanding, again, where your emotions are at and why you're scared. Mm-hmm. How do you deal with that? When they're flooding the zone like that, how do you actually take that step back and come back to your breath? And that could literally look like, for you, traveler, eating a thing of ice cream, going for a walk, hanging out with your friends, but talking about it, communicating that I am experiencing this fear. I need to get in. I don't even know what it is. Why am I feared? Why am I going through these anxiety responses? Yeah. And being able to then potentially get connected to other people in the communities, right? Maybe some people do have the ability to have some direct action that can help deal with those fears, right? Or maybe you guys all navel gaze until you find an answer together, right? Mm-hmm. But it's, again, coming together as a community, mm-hmm. coming together with your neighbors, right? Coming together with the people and everything like that you can, because, again, I understand how loud it can look online. Most people don't want their neighbor executed. Correct. Most people don't want concentration camps. Mm-hmm. Most people want to be able to afford eggs. Mm-hmm. These are human issues. These aren't political issues, necessarily. It's only a minority of people who actually wish suffering. Correct. On other people. Yeah. That's not a normal human experience. And just because I'm just going to use the word, cult leaders have been able to co-opt that and use it to push some pretty scary agendas, mm-hmm. doesn't change the fact that most people, for the most part, just want to be decent folk. And if they're Christian, want to go to heaven. If they're Jewish, want to just live a good life. Or if they're Islamic and Muslim, they just want to, again, go to paradise themselves. Mm-hmm. And Buddhists want to be reincarnated and eventually reach enlightenment, right? All these different traditions are people trying to be good. Yeah.
And I think also that talks about the importance of diversity in opinion, especially when we talk about online spaces or cult spaces. It seems like people are in this chamber where they're just kind of like, bouncing ideas back and forth, but it's the same exact idea, and it's not really any critical thought or any sort of expansion of, like, what other avenues are there or what other perspectives are there. And when you detach from that online space and you connect with your neighbors, you have those conversations with, your coworkers, your friends, the people you meet at your grocery store, you're more likely to find these commonalities of more broad issues, again, like food prices or housing prices, and kind of understand that everybody, again, is going through a similar thing. We're all trying to survive in this, and trying to find the humanity in other people, as opposed to forming a mob and being angry and trying to eradicate this outside force disrupting a typical life, when it's something larger than all of us. It requires all of us to come together and have this conversation.
It takes one response at a time. No, the story is larger than any one person. It's larger than Trump. It's larger than Elon. It's larger than Jordan. It's larger than Tal. We don't, and in the grand cosmic scheme of things, it's all just dust anyway. But while it is real to us and while we're impacting here, I think that first and foremost, right, taking the time to pause and so we can learn how to respond, right? I think that's probably as we're trying to figure out what can we actually do about this stuff. I think that's where a lot of it starts, because in order to actually do anything in history, you can't do it by yourself. Correct. It takes a community. Thank you very much for joining, being here today, Jordan. I really appreciate you. Is there anything you want to specifically say to Traveler before we get out of here?
Find time for yourself. Find time to connect more with nature. Take a break from the world. Realize all the beauty and paradise that's around us. And once you have an understanding of what life is worth fighting for, go back to your community, take that same passion, and fight for a better world. Fight for that world that you see all around you and the world that you want to exist.
Thank you, Jordan. Thank you, Traveler, for whatever moment you find yourself in right now. As always, you are loved and you are enough.